Déjame te lo voy a hacer mío.
Ah, no me metió.
Try again, dear.
No, no.
Wow, 1 ounce exactly of cheese.
Hello. All right. So today's class, the agenda, basically, to summarize, we have two major agenda. The first, we're going to talk about the overview and organization. We're going to establish the expectations for this class and the way we're going to deliver the class in the future. The second part of this agenda is we are actually going to cover the first chapter. All right, so let me start by, this is the first class. I actually turned on my video camera, but so in this case, right, at least you know who I am. But afterwards, for the rest of the class, I'm not going to even turn on the video camera. So all the classes, we're going to go through that by sharing the screen. So just give me 1 second. Let me. So we're going to sharing the screen. All right. So first, we're going to go over the introduction lecture, which is basically the organization for this class. So the first thing is the office hour. By the way, all the information I already post on Blackboard on the syllabus section. So you can see that my office hour for the semester is Monday and Thursday from 12:30 to 2:30. The reason is because I'm also teaching all the way from Monday to Thursday. So I'm going to split the dates. Another issue is in terms of the email, if you choose to send me email, make sure put on time 3020 and also the starting time, which in your cases will be time 3020, 5 p.m. On the subjects. So I can understand where you're coming from. So because I'm teaching different classes, I don't have to looking for the class roster to find out who you are. Right? So those are about the office hour and also the in terms of the emails communication. We're going to talk about that in terms of how do we communicate besides the class in just a few minutes later. And again, in terms of my teaching style, I appreciate your response, right? And the feedback in terms of you can, whenever you want to speak up, right? You can always stop me and unmute yourself, ask questions, right? If you really don't want to do that, you can also type something on the charts. Let me open that. So make sure I can see the charts, right? All right, so if I do not have any feedbacks, right, it is likely that I might go a little bit too faster for some of you guys, right? or I do not spend enough time to elaborate. So in this case, right, just make sure you just give me the feedback, right? Another issue is this class is asynchronous, right? So we are having the class during the university determine the time slots. So for us, would be from 5 p.m. Officially, we're going to have all the way to 7:05. But I understand that the regular people, you don't have that long time attention span. So in this case, right, I will instead of give a break in the middle. So I probably are going to just move on all the way, but finishing a little bit earlier, right? So even though the class is synchronous, but you probably already noticed, right? The class is being recorded and the video will be made available later. But however, I will talk about that later regarding attending the class, the importance, right? I'm going to talk about the textbook version in just a few minutes. So we're going to go to the next slides, right? So in terms of the required textbooks, the current edition, right, is 13th edition. But besides the textbooks, we actually do not require any additional stuff, right? In terms of the CD, additional software, or the Cengage access, they're not required. So all we need is only a textbooks, right? If you can find the older edition textbooks much cheaper from the website, right? You can do that because in terms of the content-wise, right, the coverage from edition, they're pretty much the same with minimum change. But obviously, the publisher want to make more profit from the sales, right? So they do make a little bit more difficult for you guys to adopt earlier edition in the sense that so typically the differences, major differences is in terms of the problem by the end of the chapter, right? So most of the time it's just shifting around. So the numbering may not be the same. So that's the only thing you probably want to bear in mind, right? In case you get early edition. So my short answer is yes, you can do that. Just give me 1 second. Let me just mute a couple students. All right. So most of the time, right, by default, right, all the students will be muted. But that's just try to prevent, give you some privacy, right? But in case you want to speak up, right, just feel free to do that, right? Anytime, right? During the class. All right, so this is about the textbooks, right? And I actually received emails from the Bronco bookstore. They actually offer ebooks access option. So you can decide whether you want to take that option or not, right? It's an ebooks rental option, right? They also have different pricing for like Cengage access, which is totally not required. In terms of the evaluation of the class, we understand that the summer session, we do have a shorter time span we have, right? So we have less than 2 months. So in this case, right, we only have 2 exams, the midterm exam, final exam, right? You can see the way in terms of the final exam is slightly higher, not because the final exam is a comprehensive one. So in this case, right, the midterm and the final, right, we don't have, the final exam only cover the material after the midterm exam. It's almost like the second midterm. But it carries slightly higher weight in the sense that because of the nature of the progress, right? The later chapter actually, we're building the materials, chapter by chapter. So when even though we do not cover directly the chapter already covered by the midterm, but because all the following chapter, we automatically just assuming you already know the stuff from the previous chapter. So that's why I give you a higher weight on the final. And in terms of the format of the content, in terms of the content, the way we go over this class is I'm going to, once we introduce a certain chapter, a model, right? So we always come with a lot of examples. So we're going to go over the example together. So the way we go over those examples, I will assume that we all use Microsoft Excel. It's not required, but it's highly recommended, right? So in this case, right, I strongly suggest you, so I know that it's a special environment, right? We have online classes, but do treat the online classes the same way. You're attending the regular class, so spare the time, have a better environment, right? Have a real computer in front of you, right? So sometimes I notice one of my students actually, when we started, he turned on the video. Obviously, he's driving, right? He's probably using a cell phone. It's not safe, right? And also using a cell phone, right? The screen is very small, right? The nature of this class is quantitative, right? You don't have the Excel. So because I expect everyone, right, using Excel to go over the example together with me, right? So in this case, right, you do need those tools with you, right? So in this case, we have quite a few examples that we're going to go over together in the class. And afterwards, I will give you homework assignments, right, with a similar problem, right, from the books. So those assignments, they're 10% of the evaluation. However, because those are the opportunity for you to practice, you're allowed to make mistake, right? So the grading on the homework assignments, right, is based on effort, which pretty much means that if you submit, you get 100%. Right? So even though all the answer maybe they're all wrong, it's okay, right? Yeah, you have the opportunity to practice. But even the homework assignments, the 10% is almost like free, right? We still have in the past always students, right, not submitting your homework assignments, right? You don't get that, right? But the homework assignments go beyond just that because those are the practice, those are the dress rehearsal for your exam, right? So if you're missing that opportunity, you're not going to do well in the exam. So in the exam, 100% of the problem, right? Actually, the next slides we're going to talk about that, right? They're quantitative, problem solving. So we don't have any those multiple choice, true and false, to test directly the definition and the conceptual questions. As a matter of fact, we go beyond that because we expect you guys to actually use those concepts to actually solve a problem. So obviously, if you can solve a problem, you understand the concept, right? All right, so, but given the format, right, the online class, all the midterm exam, the final exam will be the online exam, open books and notes, right, post on the Blackboard. So in this case, right, we do have a limitation in terms of the format. So even though in terms of the story, they are very similar to the example and also the homework assignments, right? But in terms of the way I ask the question, right, will be different in the sense that in the homework assignments or the example during the class, you can see we open in Excel, we ask you a big question, and then we're solving them step by step, right? In the midterm exam, it's similar, it's almost equivalent to giving you partial credit, right? So I will break down the bigger problem into a tiny, smaller baby step. So in one similar question, I will ask you lots of different tiny baby step questions, right? So, each of those questions, right, will be either in terms of a numerical response or sometimes multiple choice, right? But majority of them will be numerical response, right? I will assume you guys are going to use Excel to solve those problems, right? So when you're using Excel, you can simply copy and paste directly your answer from your Excel. And all my numerical response right answer will be arranged So I give you a certain tolerance, right? In case your calculation is not in terms of so in Excel, theoretically, you don't have a roundup issue, but I give you a certain range of a tolerance, right? So as long as your answer is within that range, in that sense, you don't have to worry about, how many, decimal points I need to keep, right? You simply just copy and paste, right? The right answer is always a range. Occasionally, there are several multiple choice, but the multiple choice is also quantitative. So for instance, right, so according to your, the results, right, are we accepting the hypothesis or not accepting? So those kind of, even though some of those multiple choice, obviously by the nature is qualitative, right, yes or no, right, but it's based on quantitative analysis. All right, so those will be the evaluation. We're gonna go to the syllabus on the Blackboard in just a few minutes, right? Another issue is the assignments, right? We have a deadline. Once we pass the deadline, I will post the solution. In this case, right, if you still have questions, right, you can, for instance, in the beginning of the class, right, let's say that the last night is the deadline, right? You can just stop me, Professor, can you go over one of the problem number 2 of the homework assignments, right? So I will do that, right? So sometimes I would do this once we pass the deadline, right? But in case I do not remember, I didn't do that, right? Just you can always ask me to do that, right? All right. So next, actually, I'm gonna talk about that when we go over the syllabus. So in terms of how do we come up with your overall letter grade. So another issue is in my office hour, right? So this is the time slot we are designed for me to help you guys, right? So, but unfortunately, in most of the time, right, during my office hour, nobody come, right? So in this case, right, during my office hour, I will keep my Zoom meeting, the link open, but I'm not going to open my microphone just to keep privacy, right? So, but the speaker will be on. So in case you join the office hour, just speak up, right? So I know I have a visitor, right? Or sometimes you can even send me email that just remind me you'll be coming, right? So then I will turn down the microphone and speak with you. So in this case, right, just try to seek help early on. So I would definitely try to come up with a recommendation, or suggestion to help you to do better in this class. But when you send me email by the end of the semester and ask for any extra credit, right? Don't even send email. There won't be any extra credit, right? So I would talk about how do we calculate the formula in just a few minutes. So class attendance are very crucial. Although I do not give you any credit for the class attendance, so I'm not going to counting number, see who is coming or not because it's online. So I actually know some of the students, right? I can see your name, but I'm not so sure you are actually in front of the computer, right? So in this case, right, I understand everyone, right? You have your own busy schedule. Sometimes you're not able to come, right? So we do have the video available for you, but I still want to emphasize the importance of attending the class because actually it saves you your time, right? Because during the class, right, we go through the same problem together. We have a student ask a question. You also can ask questions, right? And afterwards, when you are just study the watching the video by yourself, you definitely will spend more time to understand the stuff, right? Versus attending the class. So if you can, right, attending the class as much as possible, right? All right. So I already talked about the task, right? It'll be open books problem solving, right? I also talked about the homework assignments, right? Oh, by the way, it's kind of related to the final tips in the slides, right? So some of you guys, right, will need more practice. So you want to do more practice, right, either voluntarily or you find out you probably need more practice. So in this case, right, by the end of each chapter, you have a tons of practice problem, right? And the good things about the books, right, they have the answer to majority of the odd number, I believe, right, exercise, right? So even though it's not a solution, it's just the answer, it's still helpful, right? And another thing is, if you try to pick up some additional practice problem by the end of the chapter, right, you can always ask me, right? So even though they're not my assignments, right, I can definitely help you, right? Either during my office hour or when we talk about that, right, in the schedule, right, during the review session, right? So communication, right, is very crucial, especially during the online virtual modes, right? So in this case, right, what happened is whenever we have any change in any, for instance, new assignments, right, I will announce in class. I will also post announcement on the Blackboard. So the Blackboard will automatically send you email. So just make sure your Blackboard setting, especially email, is correct, right? And also keep in touch, right? Always let me know, right? If you have any concern, right? So the final tip before we move on to the Blackboard, right, the class schedule is, I believe, right, Tom 3020, they do have the reputation as being one of the class. It's not easy class, right? So many students fail, actually sometimes multiple times, right? So the question is, how can I get, you know, a good grade or even pass the class, right? So my tip, right, is actually not just for this class, for any quantitative class, like accounting class, you know, finance class, right? For those class, right, the students are doing good, they're doing really good. The students are not doing so well, they're doing really good, really bad. You may be wondering why. Actually, the reason is crystal clear to me, and probably to some of you already, right? So the difference is those quantitative class, right, are not those class you can just try to memorize a bunch of a concept, right? So for those quantitative model, the only way you learn that is to get your hand dirty, right? Is to practice. So for instance, how do you learn to ride a bicycle, right? If you're attending a class, I show you a video, every tips, right, how to ride a bicycle, but you never touch a bicycle, right? You definitely will fail the class. So in this case, right, but once you learn, you maybe fail a few times from the bicycle, but once you learn how to ride a bicycle, it becomes so easy, right? It's become your second instinct, right? So in this case, right, there's no other way for you to, you know, to the pass this class, right, is to practice. So as I mentioned, some of you guys, right, might be pretty good at number. You can practice once, you understand those type of problem, right? But for other students, right, you may want to practice a little bit more, right? So we will have enough practice for you guys, right, in terms of, you know, examples in the class, homework assignments, right, additional practice, right? But you have to go through that route. There's no other way. But once you go through that, you form the habits, right? You will find actually all the quantitative class, they're not so difficult. All right, so let's move on to the Blackboard, the syllabus. So I'm gonna skip the material already covered, right, on the syllabus. Let me enlarge a little bit. All right, so in terms of the final grade you will be receiving, right, it's not a secret, right? It's 100% transparent in this class. So what happened is by the end of the semester, I will download from the Blackboard all your score, right? The assignments, the exam, and so on and so forth, right? I will create an Excel file, which is similar like this, right? So all the exam assignments, right? Original score, I will convert to 100 basis. So for instance, typically the homework assignments, right? The high score will be 10, but I will change that to 100, right? So the assignments, right, times 10%, right? Midterm exam score times 4%, and so on and so forth, right? And that once you time the way, it's the weighted score, right? And then I will summarize the weighted score, right? That will be your numerical score for the class, right? And then I will check this table and then convert them to letter grade. So this is what will be happening, right? In the on the blackboard, right? If you go to the grade, right? They actually already hide a bunch of columns, right? So it's probably not worthwhile. But from your perspective, right? You're gonna see a bunch of weighted total or total, something like this, right? Those columns are totally useless. We're not using them, right? So don't send email that the professor, I got 450 out of 12,000 something. I should get a B, right? We do not use that, right? So the only way we get your overall grade is by using the Excel. So the good thing about that formula is you always know where you are, right? So in this case, you can, I would suggest you create an Excel file, right? At any given time, right? You can plug in your existing grade you already have. And for all the future home assignments or the exam, plug in any hypothetical score, right? You can do what if, right? What if you got, what would be the best scenario? We get 100%, right? What would be the worst scenario? You get a very low grade, right? And you can always know where you are, right? In order to get a B or whatever grade, right? I need to get, in the future exam, right? So you always know where you are, right? You don't have to ask me, professor, I want to know my understanding, right? You should be able to do that, right? And I also believe you still have option that you got from the spring semester, right? That you can choose either the letter grade as is, right? Or you can choose C or minus, or no credit, or credit, no credit. Those kind of options still available to you guys. In terms of the roughly the schedule, you can see that during the first 2 weeks, we're going to cover chapter 1, 2, 3, and some of the chapter 6, right? They're not new. They're just refresh your memory on your Stock 120. You probably have a new number for the semester system, just 1250, right? So, but anyway, that's so. And then starting from chapter 7, this will be something the important, right, and new, right? So we are not going to test you directly problem from chapter 1, 2, 3, or 6, 2, right? But so even though we do not have directly problem from those chapters are foundation, right? So you cannot, understand the follow chapter without understanding those foundations. So the midterm exam is scheduled on the first class, in your case, will be Tuesday on the week 6, which is June 30, right? And before that, the previous class, which is the previous Thursday, we will have a review session. However, I expect you guys to actually spend most of the time before the review session to go over all the problem you may have, right? And the review session is basically Q&A. So in this case, I won't answer the question, Professor, can you go over chapter 7 again, right? We're not going to do that. I expect you guys to spend the time, do your own homework, right? And identify those problems you want me to go over. So you can tell me, Professor, can you go over problem number 3 on chapter? So in this case, I would do that in details, right? So it's a Q&A problem solving session. So for the midterm exam. So you have to act ahead of time, right? Before the review session happening. I will remind you before that, right? And afterwards, for the final exam, we're going to cover starting from chapter 11 to chapter 15. So we have less chapter. And the final exam day, I didn't put on the syllabus, but the day is set is specified by the university. So we can check the university final exam schedule later. So this is the schedule. So far we go over the overall, in general, the class schedule. So any question in general before we move on to chapter 1?
So Professor, regarding the midterm and final, they're going to be based off of our homework assignments, I'm pretty sure, just tweaked a little bit.
Well, actually, as I mentioned, we're going to cover, so for instance, right, let's say that we have a certain topic we call topic A, right? So we have a, the model, formula, the story, right? So we have a motivation. So typically for that topic A, we have a motivation story followed by, typically not just one, several example, right? They're very similar, just different story, right? And then you have a homework assignments, again, similar problem. And again, in the exam, the same. So in this case, the same, the kind of category of the type of problem will be repeat at least 3 times. So in this case, right? So the example homework assignments, right? So we repeat and repeat and repeat, right? So there won't be any surprise. But obviously, it won't be like exactly the same problem.
Of course.
Yeah. So any general questions before we move on to chapter 1?
I proposed to Nate.
I'm sorry, can you say that again? It's all right. You can once you just find out you have a new question, you can always stop me and ask anytime. Right?
Professor, I actually had a quick question.
Yeah, sure.
So I do have Cengage Unlimited, and I found the textbook on there. But in order to grab that one, I need a course key. Do you happen to have one of those for that?
Actually, I'm not familiar with that. So if you have a Cengage Unlimited, right? So you should have access to the ebooks, right?
But in order to get into that, I need the course key. Yeah.
I see. I would try to get hold of that course key and yes. Just by the way, can you send me a reminder email? Just make sure I remember that.
Yeah, I could do that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. Any other questions? All right. We're gonna start a new chapter. By the way, all the information we talk about right here, right, is already posted on the Blackboard, right? So chapter 1, right, is nothing new. So just quickly refresh your memory, right, on your introduction stat, right? So in this case, right, I will move on pretty fast, right? But again, in case you want to stop me, just feel free to speak up, right? All right, so the agenda for this chapter is basically we're going to talk about the data, right? Different data, different source, right? We're going to talk in general, right? The methodology, right? That might be covered by this class. You can see that we have lots of different fancy names, right? Big data, data mining, artificial intelligence, but the foundation are still the same, right? So we're studying the foundation statistic, right? When you move on to the more fancy kind of new things happening in the business, right? They're just using a more mathematical tools, but basically we still deal with the same issue about how do we get the data, analyze the data, present the data, interpret the data. Right? All right, so in the beginning, right? So the statistic is very relevant, right? Even today with the coronavirus, right? You can see that the people talking about the whole bunch of stuff that actually related to statistics, right? So how do we flat the curve, right? The curve obviously is, and all those data, right? We gather are using statistics, right? Statistics is also widely, it doesn't matter what's your major, right? Accounting, even the human resources, right? You need the statistic, right? So in this case, right, I'm not going to talk in detail in terms of the example in different disciplines, right? We understand that in every discipline, so even though the previously very non-quantitative major, right, you still have to use data, right? So for instance, human resources, right, you have to get a data to understand what is the current competitive compensation, right? How do you, actually some of the human resources, they use pretty advanced the data analytics tools in today's environment. So in terms of the data, we're going to talk about the whole spectrum of data. So all the information we gather, we can call them data, right? Some of the data are quite conceptual or qualitative, right? Some of the data are quantitative. Obviously, the majority of this class we deal with quantitative data, but we need to understand the whole spectrum of those, right? And even for those qualitative data, right, in order to use the tool to analyze those very qualitative aspect of information, sometimes we also use way, so what we call measurement, right, in empirical study, right, to term those, for instance, how do you feel the quality of our products, right? From 1 to 10, we convert them to numerical numbers, right? All right, so we're gonna start with some of the basic concept, right? When we gather the data, right, so the elements is the entity we collect the data from, right? One simple elements may have different aspects, right? So to measure from the different aspects, right, we have a variable for each aspects. So in just a few minutes, you're gonna see an example, right? And also, when we do those measurement, right, we call observation. So we get sets of measurement from a particular elements, right? If we have a data sets with n elements, right, that contain n observation, right? And also you may observe more than just one variable. So in this case, the total number of data we collect, right, is the number of elements, right, multiplied by the number of variables. For instance, right, in this data sets, right, we have 8 different cordless telephone, right? So we have manufacturer, the brand, the model, right? We're collecting different aspects, which is pricing, overall score. You see the overall score originally may be a very qualitative stuff, right? But again, we're using a numerical survey, right? A Likert scale, right? All those different ways to convert it to numerical, right? We also have a purely qualitative, like voice quality, excellent, very good, those kind of qualitative scales, right? So obviously, each of those model of telephone is elements, right? And one observation, right, refer to one single row, right? And each one single row, we have multiple variables, right? That's pretty summarize the data sets we have. Next, we're going to refresh our memory in terms of the scale of those data, right? So we're going to start with, the first one is nominal, right? So nominal is basically a name, right? So we identify an elements using a nominal scale, right? Pretty much a name, right? For instance, right, different schools, right? In university, we have a business school, humanities, right? So those business humanities, right, is a nominal scale, right? But we actually we can use number, right? So for instance, we call business school is 0-1 school. Humanity is a 0-2, right? So in those cases, right, when you use number, right, the number does not carry, however, additional meaning beyond just, it's just a name, right? You cannot really say that the 1 + 1 is 2, right? Or 2 is better than 1, right? So for some of those qualitative scales, right, we do have the ranking, right? So even though it's still qualitative, right? So from nominal, we go to ordinal. So ordinal is still a name, right? Identify, but the name carry somehow in terms of the ranking order. So for instance, right, you are the first year students, right? You call freshman, right? Second year sophomore, right? So in this case, obviously you can also use number, right? First year 1, right? For freshman, right? 2 for sophomore, right? But the difference is, right? All those scale carry additional implication that not only identify an elements, but also we have a ranking in terms of seniorities, right? Freshman versus sophomore, and so on and so forth. Additionally, we have interval scales. So the interval scales, right, are always numerical in the sense that all those number, right? For instance, right, the SAT score, right? We can see the differences. We can see the distance between one number and another number, right? So in this case, right, all those the interval scales, right? There's only one way you can express them, only in a numerical way, right? Another scale is called a ratio. So the ratio is typically when you're comparing two different the variables. In all the chapter, the major chapter afterwards, right? So once we're finishing the foundation part, right? You can see that pretty much every subject, right? In the beginning, we first introduce the subjects for quantitative number. And then the next, we're going to talk about, the same thing happened to a ratio, right? It might be a percentage, and it might be just simply a strict ratio, right? All right, so next, right? In general, on a high level, we can classify them as quantitative, right? For the non-quantitative, right? We call it as categorical data, right? So in this case, right? In terms of the categorical data, right? They can be, you can use either, for instance, right? The character or a number to express them, but for the categorical data, right? They either are purely nominal, right? Or they may have a ranking, the ordinal, right? But you cannot do any calculation on those numbers if you choose use number to express those categorical data, right? On the other hand, the quantitative data, right? They're numerical, but also you actually can do those arithmetic operation, adding in a multiple and something like this, right? So for instance, right? If you go back to the categorical, let's say the ordinal scale, right? We have two sophomore. They're both second year, right? So you can use number 2, right? But you cannot really say we're adding those two, students, right? Sophomore, and then becomes year 4, they can graduate. You cannot do that, right? But on the other hand, for the quantitative data, right? You can, for 2 and 2, you can actually add them, right? So they have a meaningful interpretation on those operations, right? All right. So this is the summarize all the data, right? They are either quantitative or non-quantitative or categorical, right? For the categorical, it can be simply, so in this case, you can use number or non-number, right? In either case, it can simply nominal, right? Or ordinal, meaning that you have a ranking, right? On the other hand, the numerical, right? Either the interval, meaning just pure number, right? Or ratio, right? All right, so on another dimension, so we can also categorize the data in terms of the time, right? As a cross-section versus a time series. So the cross-section is basically along the timeline. We are looking at all those data in the same cross-section of the time frame, right? So all the data are collected up at almost the same time, right? On the other hand, if you are concerning about the change of the data along the time, right? It's called time series. If the time series is longer enough, sometimes we also call those studies a longitudinal study, right? All right, so here is an example of a time series data, right? So typically, the power of the time series study is to give you the power to predict the future, right? Given the past behavior, right? Another issue is about where you get the data from, right? In terms of the data source, right? We have existing, for instance, the internal company database, or we have a government who collect the data, right? We also have some commercial company or association that specialize in collecting those data, right, for a certain industry. You can also search Google, right, obviously, but obviously different source, they come with different credibilities, right? So sometimes, even though you can Google anything, right, but sometimes, right, to conducting a meaningful research, you have to pay for the data, right? You get from the marketing research company. In terms of the data, right, on another aspects, right, we have observation study, which is basically you do not exert any force, right, to or influence, right, over those data you collect. So you just do the observation, right? You can do more active observation, like conducting a survey, right? But you don't change the subjects. On the other hand, we have experimental study. So in this case, we do have to control the variable. So for instance, right, relevant to today's environment, right? Everybody is talking about, when we can get, vaccine for the coronavirus, right? So as a matter of fact, we have quite a few companies are conducting the human experiment right now, right? So they're recruiting the volunteer to get the vaccine. So in this case, right, getting the vaccine is a controlled experiment, right? And then we try to see that the impacts of the vaccine, right, on your capability not getting infected by the virus. All right, so another dimension of those data, right, is the efforts we get, right, so getting those data, right, it takes time, right, so the time requirements. Another is sometimes, right, you have to get the time, the data, right, or information in time, right? So for instance, if we're collecting the data to help us to make the determination when we can open a certain business industry, right? Reopen the economy, right? And obviously, you have to get the data in a timely fashion, right? Another is it's not free in most of the cases, right? It costs you to get the data, right? And every effort, as much as you can, sometimes there will be mistakes or errors, right? So for instance, we have a redundancy, right, of the error. The data, we have the data which contain errors, right? Or any sometimes, right, misleading information in the data. So we need to clean the data, right? So the next we're going to talk about the beginning of the statistic is called a descriptive statistic. As a matter of fact, we do have Excel function called a descriptive statistic. It automatically give you all those typical stat, right? The average, standard deviation, something like this, right? So it just give you a simple summarize of the data we have, right? So this is a descriptive statistic. The example of that, right, is on all the classes we have, right? If you go to the Blackboard, right, and go to the lecture notes, you may notice, right, alongside the lecture notes, sometimes also including the Excel file. So those Excel file is prepared to save your time to for some of the examples we have, right? So we're gonna do that, right? So let's click, right, and download the Excel file. So let's do that together, right? So if you open the nations, the spreadsheet, right? Enable editing, right? So I assume you guys are doing the same. So I'm not going to, it's pretty large. I'm not able to show you in one screen, right? So you can see that right here, we have some of the sample of the country or nations, right? From the World Trade Organization, right? And each country, in our case, each row represent one element, right? And each row also represent one observation. I'm not so sure what is the year that they got the data, right? But this is probably a cross-sectional data, right? A certain time of the year, we get those snapshot of one country. And the variable we have, right, is per capita income, or I'm sorry, the GDP, right? The trade deficit, right? And also the ranking, the credit ranking on the, I think this is if the country issue a bonds, right? What would be your credit rating for that, right? And also they have the outlook in terms of whether this country, the general business environment, right, is stable, positive or negative, something like this, right? So in that, right, so we're going to come up with some descriptive statistic. So the first one, we're going to find out, right, in terms of the outlook, right, what will be the frequency and what is the percentage of frequency. So we're going to come up with that results. How do we do that, right? So I'm pretty sure some of you guys are pretty good at Excel, right? Any volunteer, right? So how do we, in the beginning, counting how many country is rated as a stable or positive or negative? How do we do that? What would be the Excel function we can do that? Any volunteer?
Professor, can you repeat that?
Yeah, so basically, the first thing we want to do, right, is we're going to try to figure out, right, the summary statistic or the descriptive statistic in terms of only one variable, the outlook, right? So out of those countries, how many of those are rated as positive, stable, or negative? So that's the first frequency question, right? So how do we get this information in Excel? So obviously, you can do the dumb way, right? Just counting, okay, 1 stable, 2 stable, you can do that, right? Obviously, we don't want to do that, right? So anybody know how to do that? Counting how many stables we have in this column. Anybody? So I'm pretty sure some of you guys are pretty good at Excel, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to construct a table, right? So in terms of the outlook, right, there's only 3 different categories, right? Yeah, either stable, right? Positive, right? And negative, right? So in the beginning, we're going to counting how many stables are there, how many positive are there, how many negative are there. What would be the Excel formula? Anybody remember? So for those of you already forgot about your Excel, right? Equal sign, right, is the way we start any formula, right? So equal sign, right? And another is, just 1 second, let me, just give me 1 second. Let me make sure that everyone you have, let me try to see how do I do that, right? I'm going to wrap the text, save some space, right? So those are the table we're going to create, right, using Excel, right? So we're not going to use any advanced Excel. It's a very simple Excel function, right? Oh, by the way, in the textbooks, right, by the end of the chapter, they actually have tips in terms of all the function, all the operation we have done, right? How do you do that in Excel? They have a step-by-step tips for you, right? So I'm going to create, in this case, right, formula text formula, or formula text. So you're going to see the formula I'm actually using, right? All right, so, and then I will give you the formula text for this row, right? Just let me know whether you're able to see what's going on the computer, right? All right, so first, right, I'm gonna counting how many stables right there, right? And as a matter of fact, right, the Excel function, right, it's called counting, right? If you type the first few letters, right, count, right, you can see we have several options, right, in Excel, right? I guess it's tiny for you to see, but in your own Excel, you can see that, right? C-O-U-T, right? You can see that the count and the count A, right? So they give you the tips. What does it mean, right? So the first is counting the number of a cell, right, that contain number, right? And then this is a counting not empty, right? The blank, right? Those are not what we want, right? So this is so basically this is how many. So if you choose one column, right, how many of those columns contain number or empty or totally blank, right? So in our case, we want to do a little bit more complicated, right? It's count if, right? So this is a count if function. A count if the function give you, okay, what is the range? So the range right here, right, is obviously the this whole column of data, right? So this column, right? This is my range, right? Next, what is my criteria? So my criteria is, I'm gonna use, in this case, right, stable, right? So matching the character, right? 39, right? Let's check out, right? Yeah, stable 39, right? So in this case, right? And once we get that, right, the next, we're using similar function, right? Count if, right? Count if, right? The same range, so F2, right? All the way to F61, right? And counting how many of those are positive, right? Similarly, we're gonna count if, right? How many of those, right? So F2, right? To F61, right? And how many of those are negative? 11, right? So this is the formula, right? And this is the results, right? And another thing is, you can see that how many countries do we have, right? We can simply, in this case, right, we can find out, right, using count. Any cell which is not empty, right? This range. So obviously, you can look at the number of rows, right, to find out that. But you can also do that, right? So altogether, we have a 60 observation, right? 60 country, right? Observation, right? Because the next, we're going to convert that to, because 39, what does it mean? You may have not a very good idea in terms of what we're going to put this number into perspective, right? So what happened is this is the total, right? The total is 60, right? We're going to turn that into percentage, right? So 39, right, over 60, right? Because next we're going to do the copy and paste, right? So we have to make sure that the 60 would be fixed when we do the copy and paste. Everybody know how to do that? How do we fixing this J7 in Excel when you do the copy and paste? Anybody remember? It's F4, right? It's pretty much put $sign in front of J and also $sign in front of the 7, right? So in this case, right, we have this. So when you copy and paste, right, it won't automatically seeking the number afterwards because we don't have anything afterwards, right? We can actually, if you really want to see that in percentage, right? We can format a cell, right? And express them in percentage, right? Right? So 65% of the country is rated as a stable, 16.6%, right, is positive, 18.33% is considered negative, right? But as a matter of fact, right, you can also do, in this case, right, in your Excel, right, if you click data, right, on the top, the most top right corner, are you able to see data analysis? If the answer is yes, let me know. Are you able to see that? The data analysis under the data view, the top menu on the top, on the right upper corner. Do you see a data analysis option? No? Okay. In case you're not, right? Meaning that the data analysis is not yet installed, right? So you have to go all the way to File, click File, right? And in the File, go all the way down to Option. In my case, is actually on the left-hand side all the way down, right? Click Option. And once you click Option, you're gonna have a pop-up window, right? So are we on the same page, right? You have a pop-up window, right, from the option, right? Next, on those pop-up window, right, on the right-hand side panel, right, go all the way down. Second, from bottom, right, the second one is Adding, right? Click Adding, right? And once you click Adding, you see another window appear on the right-hand side, right? Then you go all the way to the bottom. You can see that this window, right, at the bottom is called Managing the Excel Add-in, right? And click Go. All right, click Go. And then you have another pop-up window. You can see that there are several options, right? It's pretty small for you guys, right? But if you click, you're gonna see that, right? So you're gonna check the box for the first one. It's called Analysis 2-pack, right? And once you click OK, if it's your computer, it will be memorized. So you don't have to do this next time, right? It's okay, right? Then next you go to the data, right? And you should able to see the data analysis 2-pack, right? And you click the data analysis 2-pack, right? You have a pop-up window. Again, the font is very tiny. You're probably not able to see that. So in the data analysis, so here is the pop-up window, right? You have a descriptive, in this case, right? Descriptive statistics, right? And you click OK. Now, you have an input range. So input range is basically this column, right? So this is your input range, right? And your output range, right, by default is a new worksheet, right? But in my case, I would like to see that in the same worksheet, right? So right here, click the output range, right? And then click inside that, right? And then specify which cell you want to start the report. So in my case, I'm gonna click right here, right? So my report, the outputs will be starting from here, right? And then check the first box, summary statistics, right? Forget about, just ignore all the other checkbox, right? Check the summary statistic, right? And click OK. Input range contain non-numerical data. Oh, sorry. So in this case, right, unfortunately, the descriptive statistic, right, the 2-packs right here can only analyze numerical data. Sorry about that. So they won't be able to directly come up with this range. To do that, we have additional tools, but to save the time, today we're not going to go over more advanced tool because we're not going to give you home assignments or task you for that too, right? So all you have to do all you have to know is to manually create this table by using the COUNTIF function, right? Any questions? All right, so this is the example of the descriptive statistics. All right, so the next, here we can also presenting the data in different format, right? So in this case, this is the bar charts, right? It give you the visual, right? So even though we have all those number original data, right, percentage, right, give you more perspective, right? But this give you more impressive kind of a visual presentation, right? And as a matter of fact, right, you're gonna take many different classes in College of Business, right? I cannot guarantee every class, right? You're gonna have something that you're gonna definitely know the knowledge or the skill you learn will definitely directly applicable, will be very useful, right? The only thing I can guarantee, right, is the Excel, right? In terms of the using Excel, in terms of the using Excel to prepare those tables, right, for your presentation, it becoming more and more important skill for any manager, right? Sometimes, right, it will determine whether you'll be promoted, right, or not, right? It depends on how do you tell the story, and not just about you have done a good job, right? But you have to know how to present your job, right, to your manager so they remember your name, right? To have impression on your performance, right? And many of those are quantitative, right? And many of those, right? It's when you talk about the data, the number is kind of very, very dry. You have to give tell a story in a very visual way, right? So the data visualization, right, is really, really important, right? I cannot emphasize too much on that, right? So it would definitely have a huge impact on your future performance, right, as a future manager, right? All right, so we can also go through, in this case, I'm not going to go through the details, right, to come up with a histogram, right, because in next two chapters, actually, we're going to do some of those examples, right? So on the GDP per capita, right, for all those countries, right? So again, we can come up with that, right? We're going to go through one of those examples in chapter 2 or 3. I don't remember exactly which chapter, right? So into chapter 1, we just give you the overshots, right? So in terms of the numerical descriptive statistic, right? We actually can use the Excel function I mentioned before, right? So that's the descriptive statistic from the Excel can only handle number, unfortunately. Right? All right. Another topics is we're gonna go beyond just have a summary of the data, right? So we're gonna have a statistics inference, right? So for that, right, is to try to understand, right, for whatever we already have, right, our hypothesis or our theory. So from whatever we know, right, either the history or existing data, we try to figure out. So for instance, right, given today's environment, right, we have some country, for instance, Italy or in China or some other country, they have a different approach to this coronavirus. They have different, in terms of the time they have, outbreak, different stage, right? They're ahead of us, right? So can we learn something from that, right? So this is, if you want to do a little bit more, right? You can do the statistic, the study to try to figure out, in different states, right? California versus New York City, right? When should we, go to the next stage? What should be the method we're going to take, right, to prevent the second, suppose we have the second, waves come, right? And also we have another things going on in today's, not just California, but also the whole US, right? We have the sensors coming every 10 years, right? We're collecting the data. They are very, very crucial for for the politics, right, in California, because if you're not able to get hold of all the population, you overlook some of the populations, right? You have a lower number. If you have a low number, you're going to lose some the congressional seats, right? You're going to lose those, the federal budgets, right? Allocation, right? You have less voice, right? In the Congress, right? For the California agenda, right? So the examples, right? Again, we're not going to go through this example, right? How do we do the statistic inference, right? So because we're going to talk in a lot more details, right, later, right? All right. The final topics we have, right, is the business analytics, data mining. Those are the very popular terms, right? You learn. So what is the business analytics, right? It's pretty much the same, right, as the statistic, right? Is once we have a data, right, we try to find out, for instance, what happened in the past. It's a description, right? And predictive analytics, right, is given what we know about the past, right? What will be happening in the future, right? And in terms of the solution, right, we also have a prescriptive analytics, which is what would be the best course of action or decision making, right? We can take, right? And all those, right, is based on the data, right? So we're making the decision based on the numbers, right? And the data mining is basically about, getting, so data mining is more advanced technology. You can collecting data without any preconceived theory or structure. You try to find out the structure yourself, right? And the more advanced data mining, including machine learning, right? Supervised learning, unsupervised learning. So those artificial intelligence, right? They're basically more advanced mathematics you can use, right, to analyze the data, present the data, right? But in general, right, today's, because, right, the internet age, right, because we have a capability to record our business transaction and collecting data, so we have a large and more complicated data available for us, right? So the big data also for you guys, it doesn't make any sense for you guys, right? But if you have more advanced knowledge, then the big data do make a huge difference in the sense that if you have access to all the data we have, right, versus previously, because of the technology constraint, we're not able to get all the data. We have to sample a small data. So the algorithm we're going to use, right, are very crucial. But with the big data, some old algorithm, when we consider is not efficient, not as good, right, becomes very powerful today, right? So in this case, for the big data, talking about the volumes, the total data we have, right, and also the speed we're processing and generate those data, and also the varieties, right, the different type of those data, right? So in real life, in the business, right, the analytics, right, that's including the statistic, right, is very challenging, right? All right, so we're not going to go through the details, right, in terms of the example, for instance, right, the regression, which will be the chapter 15 and 14, we're going to cover in the later part of this class, right? And the classification, clustering, unfortunately, we're not able to cover them, right? It belongs to more advanced topics, right? Or association rule mining, right? All right, so the last topic is when we deal with data, right? Ethical becomes very important because given that you can interpret the same data, right? That you cannot theoretically, right? Technically, you can try to mislead your audience, right, with the true data without lying. So in this case, right, given you have those different options, how do you for instance, how do you do the sample? how do you analyze the data? How do you present the data, right? So it becomes ethical issue because if you have something actually hurt yourself, right? Can you use those statistic tools, right, to hide the facts or put attention away from the true issue, right? So even though when we're talking about a statistic, it looks like it's a hardcore science, right? It's almost a part of the mathematics, right? It's not related to ethical, it's not related to emotion. As a matter of fact, it's have lots to do with the ethical issue, right? So because of the time, we're not going to talk too much on that. In the later life, right, in your job, you will understand, right? So sometimes, right, you have to make a not easy decision in terms of just review the data that actually may hurt you, right, in the short term, right? Should you do that, right, or you're going to do something that unethical, that protect yourself, right, in the short term, but eventually in the long term are going to hurt you, right? All right. So today we, as a summary, we go through the organizational issues. We go through the refresh your memory, right? We also give you a sample of how do we use the Excel, right, to go through the examples, right? So before we, as I already mentioned, right, we're recording this video, right? All the video, right, will be made available later. Before we signing off, right? Any questions? No questions? All right, in case, and again, in case you have any questions, right, you can just email me or don't forget, we have a discussion forum created for each chapter, right? So just you can start a new thread, right? All right, so have a nice weekend and see you next week.
Professor.
Okay, go ahead.
Quick question. Your office hours, again, because you sent the email for the Zoom meeting, but it was just the hyperlink to it. Do you have the meeting numbers so that way I can plug it in? Because there's something actually going wrong with my Zoom for some reason. I have to use a different browser because it won't take the link you've set.
Actually, I'm a little bit confused. What do you mean by, so if you click the link, what will be happening? Oh, by the way, just give me 1 second. Let me,
of course.
Let me allow you to, I'm going to allow you to share your screen. So I would like to understand exactly what is your...
I'm actually on my phone, Professor, because I can't get it on my laptop, unfortunately. Yeah.
So, okay, let me just say that, right? You don't need any, what's happening is, as a faculty, I have a professional version of the Zoom. So I have a unique Zoom meeting, my personal Zoom meeting ID, right? So in this case, right, I do not, so in this case, right, actually I can, maybe I can provide you with, I think it's, the link is actually, it would be better for you to just go to the syllabus, right? If you have a trouble, you can copy and paste. Are you able to see that? Oh, sorry, I forgot to share the, just give me 1 second. Let me share that screen. All right. Are you able to, so basically this is the Blackboard syllabus, right? On the syllabus, right? I have in the methods of instruction, I have the link, which is https, right? cpp.zoom.us, right? /my name, right? So in this case, right, we don't have like a number. I understand that sometimes, right, if you don't have a professional Zoom user, every time, right, the link is unique. They have a bunch of a number, a letter, which is, and sometimes they also require ID, a password, right? In our case, right, the only thing you need is just that link. It does not have an ID or any password, right? So in case you have a trouble, access, right, you can copy and paste the link to your browser. I'm pretty sure that you should not have any problem to open the. Obviously, if you, I don't think you're using the Zoom the first time, right? You have to, on your computer or on your phone, you have to download something.
Understood. Thank you, Professor, for the assistance.
Yeah. Maybe you can, by the way, you can try later, but if I'm not able to, if I'm not make this meeting available, you're probably not able to, maybe you can try that 5 minutes before the class and see if you have any trouble. Right? Any other?
Is the lecture going to be available? Because I would like to see the Excel portion of your lecture again.
Okay, so this will be solved in 2 ways. First, let me go to the lecture notes, right? So sometime later, or at least tomorrow, right? In chapter 1, right, you're gonna see another link, which is a YouTube link, right? Which is a first class, right? The video, right? In the video, we have all the Excel stuff, right? Another is probably not for this, actually for this class as well, right? I have an Excel, right? So I will upload this Excel. So later on, right, you're gonna see this, we have a lecture notes, right? PDF lecture notes, the original Excel data sets, right? And we have another is the example, right? So some of the example, I may have multiple tabs, right? For instance, I will name this guy as nations, right? For instance, in some chapter, we have multiple data sets, right? We have so this example 1, nations, another, I will create another, tabs, right? For another example, right? So in this case, I will keep updating the same, right? For instance, example for chapter 1. I would name, typically I would name the Excel that. So in this case, example in chapter 1, when you open, you're gonna see multiple tabs, right? Each tab will be one example, that's including the data sets, the solution, something like this, right? So in this case, right, you can either watch the video, you see that all the dynamics, right? How to create this table, and so on and so forth, right? And also you have the Excel available. When you click, right, you can see the formula, right? Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So,
Professor?
Yeah.
So we will have our first homework assignment on after Tuesday.
Well, not for today. Probably next Tuesday. So this week we don't have any homework assignments.
Yeah. So so when will it be due then?
Well, for every homework assignments, you will have at least 1 week.
Okay, thank you.
So you definitely will have enough time. And by the way, if you submit a bit late, it's okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I saw another student was trying to ask questions. Any other questions?
Professor?
Huh?
I have one question. So I came in late, so I didn't hear the part where the textbook.
All right. So regarding the textbooks, right? So basically, the short answer to all the similar question is you can go to the syllabus, you find out the latest edition, right? But if you get an older edition, in general, it's okay, right? Because the content-wise, they're pretty much the same, right? But in terms of homework assignment, sometimes when I directly refer to chapter 2, problem number 10, then the numbering might be the different. So in this case, right, you can either ask me or ask your classmates to make sure we're talking about the same problem, right? Another issue regarding the textbook is we do not require anything other than the textbooks. We don't need the CD or any software come with the books. We also do not need any, for instance, Cengage access.
Okay.
Only the book. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
By the way, the whole video, right? The whole class, the video, will be available later.
Okay. Thank you so much.
So, Professor, when you mean later about this video, in order for us to go back to as a reference, do you mean within the next, let's say, 48 hours before Saturday, hopefully?
Well, I would try to. So I would try to make this available as soon as possible because it takes time to convert the video and upload to the YouTube, right? But typically, this is what happened. You can always send me a reminding email that Professor, when is your video available, right? Just remind me in case, right? You didn't see the video, afterwards.
Understood. Understood. Thank you, Professor.
Okay. Yeah. Any other questions?
Sorry, I have one more. So about the grading part, you said we still have the grading options for summer?
Well, this is my guess. I do not know for sure, but because I don't see any change of the situation, right? So I think what the option you got from the spring semester should still be available to you. This is what I believe, right? Because you are, so in this case, right, both the faculty and the students, right, are forced into virtual mode, right? It's not our choice, right? So it may affect your learning, I guess that's why. So basically, you can see the purpose of that design, right? The 3 options is to make sure it won't affect your GPA. But it will still affect your, if you fail, you still have to take this class. Suppose this is the required class, you still have to take it again.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for answering.
Any other questions? All right, so if you don't have any questions, I'm gonna signing off, right? And again, if you just have a question later, you can always send me email, right? All right, see you next week.